For our inquiry question, we decided to question what effect did ironclad warships have on the outcome of the Civil War. Because of the fact that many land battles were the major part of the Civil War, naval warfare was often overlooked in history books. Ironclad warships, or more commonly known as ironclads, were the most effective naval force. They were actually used many years before the Civil War also, but they were never commonly used, and the Civil War marked an important milestone in which the first time that they were used happened. The Confederacy first used armored wooden boats. These were just simply armored wooden boats, and these were able to ward off enemy Union blockades quite effectively.
When they were first seen in March 8, 1862, the Confederacy made their finishing touches on the CSS Merrimack, or more famously known as the CSS Virginia. This was built out of a burnt hull from the abandoned Union ship, the USS Merrimack, but since they followed the tradition of naming their ships after their burnt hulls, they decided to name it the CSS Merrimack as well. The Union, unfortunately, started without ironclads, but later built two classes of ironclads throughout the war. First, they built the Monitor class, which were 50 replicas of the first ironclad, which was the USS Monitor. They were built for large harbor or ocean warfare. The City class consisted of smaller ironclads, which were used for maneuvering through rivers for battle.
The Confederacy with ironclads had an early advantage in the war. This was prevalent in the Battle of the Ironclads, where the Merrimack came out, mauled Union ships, and intimidated the third. Later, it waited for the sun to rise before hitting the third ship. This clearly showed the advantage in which the Confederacy had greater naval warfare. However, because of the fact that the Union had greater industrial capacity, it was able to gain advantage in the naval battle later. They built the USS Monitor and sent it out that night. This featured a revolving two-cannon turret for freedom of movement while aiming, resulting in accurate aiming, and this was the biggest advantage with the Monitor class. The Monitor attacked the Merrimack and started one of the most famous battles at sea.
So the two ships battled at near point-blank range. Imagine if you had two guys with shotguns shooting at each other from 2 feet away, and that bullets were literally bouncing off each other. This is what was happening during the Battle of the Ironclads. The iron armor were protecting the ships from these direct hits, so the ships weren't sinking after one or two shots. However, the turning point occurred when the Monitor captain, Lieutenant John L. Worden, was injured by a cannonball from the CSS Merrimack. This allowed the Merrimack to escape, and unfortunately the battle was called a draw. 2 months later, the CSS Merrimack was trapped by a Union blockade, but the Confederacy was forced to blow up their ship rather than give up their ship to the Union.
In conclusion, ironclads had a large impact on naval warfare. The original domination of the Merrimack to revenge by the Monitor showed a conclusive history of how ironclads were essential to winning the naval battle in the Civil War. The effect of ironclads on the Civil War lasted on the world, in fact, lasted far beyond the Civil War. Ironclads were often used in World War II. In addition, in famous D-Day pictures, one can see clearly in the background ironclad warships delivering soldiers to that fateful day. Despite the fact that ironclads were not very commonly used before the Civil War, this marked an important time period in which the ironclads were now used much more extensively.
So that was our presentation on ironclad warships. Hope you enjoyed and you learned a couple things about these famous ships.